Good evening. My name is Johanna Koljonen and you are watching Crosstalks, a collaboration between two of Sweden's leading universities, Stockholm University and KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology. We are broadcasting today from Stockholm University's Department of Computer and System Science at the Nord building in Kista Science City, just outside of Stockholm. And you can join us in discussing today's topics on Twitter, where our handle is CrosstalkTV and our hashtag is Crosstalks. The world has changed drastically in just the last 20 years, but the institutions and structures we use to educate people are often hundreds of years old. Are traditional ways of learning still relevant? Is the traditional university with its large buildings and established structures for learning becoming obsolete? How is the role of the teacher changing? And are there universal, timeless principles of learning that remain? How should we utilize new technological advances to enhance learning? Joining us in the studio to discuss these topics are Uno Fors, Professor in IT and Learning, Department of Computer and System Sciences at Stockholm University, with a research focus on simulation and visualization for learning and assessment. Tessy Cerratto Pargman, Associate Professor of Human-Computer Interaction, Department of Computer and System Sciences, Stockholm University. And Johan Thorbiörnson, Director of the Center for Net-Based Learning, KTH Royal Institute of Technology. Welcome to Crosstalks. Give them a big hand. So, Teresa, you've studied how technology affects learning and education. What are some of the ways in which the ways we are learning have been changed by technological advances?
Well, thank you for the question. Information and communication technologies have multiple effects on our ways to teach and learn. Taking the example of the internet, so I can point to three main changes that have to do with how we access information today, how we interact with information, and also how the information that we produce is stored. So I can develop a little bit of, I don't know if...
yeah, sure.
With the emergence of the internet, the relationship that we have, the information becomes, the information is free, the information is everywhere. So that has a great impact on educational institutions and on teachers because they are not owning the information any longer. They don't have no longer control over this information or the sources of information that the students are interacting with. So that changes the way in which we teach and learn because teaching is not transmitting or communicating information any longer, and learning is not reproducing or replicating an information. It's rather to transform information into something new. So this is one of the changes that are related to the access to the information. Then I think probably it's interesting to say that this information that is out there, that is free, is not only the amount of information, but it's also that this information is not organized in any specific way. Yeah. So the challenge is to help the students to provide them with tools to make sense of this information. So I would say that that's a second change. And
Johan, you've been working and trying out perhaps such a tool. You've been working with online education and online courses for 20 years, which is historically astonishing. So if we go back 20 years, what was it that made you want to start this in the first place?
That's a very interesting question. I think that question is very good to put today on the table. And at that time, people didn't talk about internet, actually. It was very popular to talk about CD-ROM and the interactive education through computers. But we got some money from EU to try out new ways to reach out to people living in the forests in Sweden who still lived there and didn't yet took the step to move to university.
I should say for our international audiences that
Yes.
these are rural communities. They're not living wild in the forest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have a big country, and so it was kind of a prototype for what we see also today. There are big needs to reach out to people who don't have equal opportunities to live in a city where you have a university. So at that time we build a bridge for people to try out, to attend some courses online, and then after that they took their final decision to take their family, quit their job or whatever, and move to a university city. And we started with just 25 students, but it was very successful. So after a few years, we have a couple of hundreds, and then it just been growing. This trend.
But this program then was about giving access to sort of trial period for the university, but it still ultimately culminates in joining the real university, so to speak.
Well, that's an important question. It was real university courses, but we picked some courses which they anyhow was forced to attend when they come to university. So it was for real in some way. They got university credits, but still at that time people didn't think that this was the real university. Today the picture have changed, I think. So today many students actually ask for online courses, and these are this can be high quality and I mean real university, as attending a real university. But at that time people still thought you were forced to move to a university city to have your full education.
So the idea of the university education was very tied to a physical location and a social context, and this seems to be slipping. We'll have reason to return to this, I think, during the conversation. Pardon. Uno, you work with simulating virtual scenarios for education and training purposes. Can you describe just some of the situations or some of the kinds of areas where you're applying this?
The general idea is to prepare students or other kind of learners for complex situation in real life, like preparing doctors to meet patients with complex problems, social workers to meet people with drug habits and so on, or actually train people for this. So you could be a virtual interviewer instead, and I can train and prepare myself for this situation. For example, if I should be extremely nervous and have never done this before, then I could train with a virtual interview a few times and so on.
But very specifically, just so we can visualize it, what are these? Are these computer programs? Or?
They are computer programs, not three-dimensional beings like we are, but kind of representation on the computer screen of an interviewer or a patient or a student or a client in social care, and by which you can ask questions, you can have a dialogue, you can discuss with these, and these virtual humans or virtual characters, they react emotionally and not only on what I am asking, but how I am asking. So they can be upset, angry, happy, or even walk out of the room and say, "Oh, that was a rude question. I don't want to answer that."
How does the program, or I guess it's a computer game essentially, how does this software know how I asked?
The majority of these systems are like you're typing questions from keyboard, but with the technology nowadays, you can actually have automated interpretation of human speak, but that is still a little bit complex. So the majority actually are working with the typing questions. Okay,
so between you, I think we've covered. Teresa is speaking about information, and you're speaking about the idea of the school and the teaching environment a lot, and about access as well. And you're talking about a kind of training that is indeed impossible to do in a traditional classroom. I would assume that that's the benefit.
Yeah.
Because textbook cases don't interact with you, essentially. There is something here that is worrying me a little bit, which is I seem to remember many of us in our audience are grad students. They don't remember the 1980s, but I remember in the 1980s. I don't think we talked so much about information, but we talked more about knowledge. And there is a distinction here. I thought it was interesting that you didn't say knowledge. So, isn't the education system, in fact, and sorry if I sound like a complete Luddite now, but isn't the education system a very good answer to your question about how do we make new meaning out of this mass of information? Isn't that what schools are for? I have become a little worried about the idea that maybe we should change schools, even though I asked the question. I'm retracting my question. Why is not the answer a traditional school to this question of how to sort out the information? Uno, you looked like you had.
I think traditional schools or universities are good. However, what we can do here is to prepare people for very complex things, like preparing if the client starts to fight with you, or if the drug abuser starts to scream at you, or if the children in schools are harassing each other. And those situations are really complex to train in the real normal school, in a lecture and so on. So that's what I think is the new thing with this. You can prepare people to meet unexpected things in a much better way than before.
Johan.
I think everything is very much about putting things in a context. So, I mean, information in itself can be worthless, but when you put it in a context or relate it to something else, then suddenly you have something you can, something tangible you can talk about and look as knowledge. And I think also good education, whether it's in a school or internet, is very much about putting things in a context and give the students tools for handling their situation, and also some transparency about what's going on and preparing for next step. But what you're talking about, I think, is both to put things in a context, I mean, in a real situation, virtualized, and also prepare for next steps, so to say. And but the information in itself can be very hard to use if you don't have these different criteria for fulfilled.
Therese.
Yeah, I think that first I was thinking about what do you mean by traditional, educational institutions, and what are the new institutions, the ones that have technology or recognize technology? So, but what I think is that the big challenge that we have today has to do with this providing the students tools for, as I said before, making sense of the information and producing insights that have consequences on our actions. So, I mean, learning is not replicating things because the information is out there. As we are producing the information that is out there. So we are in a way organizing and building up social memory. So what is important today is to make an insightful and productive use of these collective resources in a relevant way in a specific situation. So I think that that's the challenge of these, probably the universities today, to prepare the students to make insights that led to actions. So it's not to repeat things, it's not to know or summarize what is already known. This is not enough.
Because how is this connected to the role of the teacher? Because in a way, the traditional idea of a teacher, certainly on the sort of entry-level courses, would be, well, this is the person, in fact, whose job it is to summarize what is already known. And then some people will say, well, I don't need to do that because I shall Google it. Do we need teachers? Uno.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not the one that's saying you can get rid of teachers, but the role of the teachers will be different. As Teresa said here, that the teachers are now not reading loud out of the textbooks. They are more supervising the students, how they could learn better and discussing issues and problems and challenges. So I think, yes, teachers will be there for hopefully ever, but in a new role.
We see that very clearly in my courses, for example. These are still a sort of prototype for me when I'm doing other things. We have about 10,000 simultaneous students in my math courses. And of course, support and all kind of services, support is very important. You cannot have an automated system only. You need to have a strategy for supporting the students in a good way. And we have a level-based support. So some easy questions can be taken by older students. They know very well how thing works and so on. And more advanced questions we can have higher level support for. And the examination and assessments, of course, should be guaranteed by some academic senior staff. And the producers of the material, they are also teaching in some way. We need an editor and a group of teachers who make new materials and iterate the material together with the students. So here we see that we don't have a single teacher, we have a team of teachers who support in different ways. But
part of this becomes about changing authority in the context of teaching. Is this a secretly ideological agenda where you're just trying to bring down the hierarchies?
Some people think that, and some people get very afraid that being replaced by a computer or somebody else. And but I think you shouldn't be afraid, and there's no hidden agenda. We are all living on this planet, and we need each other to. I mean, we learn from each other. It's very basic. As animals or whatever, we need other people to understand and some sort of dialogue. And all of us have been learning from other people.
Actually, of course, that's also why UNO's training scenarios work, because learning from the other human in the situation, even if it's a virtualized situation, I'm realizing that what you guys are doing is in some ways super similar. Yeah? Joining us now via Skype is Claire Belísle, a consultant and researcher working, among other things, with the European Commission project Open Education Europa, and calling us, I believe, from Ottawa, Canada. Welcome to Crosstalks.
Thank you. I'm very happy to join you.
Claire, what are the main ways in which digital technology is changing the most basic components of education, like reading and writing?
Well, if you ask me that question, I could give you answers concerning a lot of new activities that are going on in schools. But I think that to understand what is changing, I think we have to go back a bit and have a broad view of what is actually happening, because I think that digital technology is only the emerging part of the iceberg. I think we're undergoing a very important cultural change, and that digital technology is helping us bring about this cultural change. But it's probably not the only cause of this change. And to understand the change we're living, I think we have to think about what happened at the Renaissance, at the 16th century. They had organized educational institutions like we have today. They had a lot of knowledge that needed to be transmitted. I'm thinking about this book of Anne Blair, Too Much to Know. People felt that with the printing, they had too much information. And so I was thinking that if we look at what was happening today, the problem we have to face is very similar to the problem that they have faced. This problem is that we are still very much thinking of knowledge to be transmitted to the new generations, whereas the people that are living this revolution, cultural revolution, think about creativity and how to become themselves, how to develop themselves. And we all know that schooling as it is now, from kindergarten to university, is less and less attractive to kids. And that's part of the problem. I think as long as we don't change the basic aim of education, and most teachers are trained for transmission and not for developing human beings and making creative people. So we have to rethink, how does knowledge fit into developing creative minds? So that's what the big change, I would say.
That's very interesting. Teresa, do you agree?
Absolutely, I think that. I mean, I absolutely agree with Claire. She's pointing out this change. We are viewing learning in a transformative way, in a performative way, and and I think that the teachers have a great task to do. So it's a great challenge, and I don't see that the teachers are going to disappear in the future. I think that it's very important that they are leading, providing students with conceptual tools, with intellectual tools, to really make sense of the information, to transform this information, to know where they can find information, to criticize this information, to ask about the sources of the information, to understand that the information that they get, probably it has been pre-processed by computational processes. So all this knowledge, I think it's important for the students to know, so as they can make or produce, as I said before, insights that can transform the information and do something that has consequences on the action. So it has very much to do with this creative aspect of learning that Claire was talking about.
I like this discussion about creativity, which Claire talked about, and your discussion about the teacher's role and so on. Because I think if you want to create smart groups of students and smart individuals, so to say, it's very important as a leader for the group that you don't destroy the processes which can create this phenomenon. Some people talk about the wisdom of crowds. The crowd can be very stupid if
Very
everybody
stupid.
do the same thing as everybody else do. For example, buying stocks or whatever. Or I mean, there are a lot of funny examples. If you're just standing in a corner at the city and looking up in the sky, people start to look up in the sky and ask, what are you looking for? And suddenly there are a crowd of people looking up in the sky, and more people.
So how do we make sure that the groups that we're creating are not like that?
Yeah, I think here the new way of learning through, for example, internet, and also quite individualized process like you talk about, also where you can prepare for the next step or prepare to the discussion, make it possible to have a transparent aggregation, so to say, of individual inputs. And as a coach for that, it's very important that you understand how things work and can in some part let it go. And don't stop anything. In some parts, be quite strong in your position at structuring up the process.
But I completely agree that we should, of course, teach this sort of transformational processes and this individual knowledge making. But there must still be fundamentals that are, like, I would assume that reading and writing, even in our visual culture, reading and writing would be key. Is reading and writing changing because, for instance, children are interacting with tablets and things like this from when they're very, very young? Do we know about this, Claire?
Well, when you say that reading and writing are very important, I would make the assumption that you are thinking about the written word and the written word on paper. And of course, this is the way that we have dealt with knowledge generally, predominantly. But it's not the only way of accessing knowledge and of building knowledge, of acquiring knowledge, of developing and of sharing knowledge. But we're stuck with knowledge and the written word. In the scientific world today, visuals are as important as written words and numbers, because the quantity of information cannot be grasped by human minds through words and numbers, but it can be grasped. The information can be grasped through visuals, for example. So if we go along with the new possibilities that we have with the tools we have for visualizing information, for example, then reading and writing has to be rethought in terms of these new capacities that we have. Just looking at the world, observing today in the scientific world, you cannot observe, you don't observe the same thing if you observe just with the human senses and you observe with digital tools. Like even a digital camera will bring out a lot of things that you couldn't capture before, for example. So you see the question of what is changing, it's not only that if people reading faster or slower on the screen or on paper. Of course, it's important for a teacher that has to bring a student from not be able to read to being able to read at the end of the year. That for them, that's important. But I don't think that we need to solve that problem immediately. What we need to find out is how do we bring together the need to invent, discover, and create that the digital culture brings about, and the conviction that we have that all the knowledge that humanity has accumulated is worth looking into. So it's combining the two that has to be rethought.
Teresa, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Claire. I have been studying writing, and one can ask how, I mean, what I have learned about writing, and I mean, taking in slightly another perspective, I can say that writing activities as learning activities present a specific organization, and that organize the multiple relationships that, for example, a writer has with the text, with the context of the task, with the writing tools, with the knowledge, the ideas, with the representation. So what I'm saying is that when you introduce a new tool, as for example, which has affordances of visuals as learning, as Claire mentioned, this tool is penetrating already an organization. It's a web of relationships that get challenged, that are going to change. So it takes time, this transformation. So sometimes we might think that someone is slow, or our educational institutions are slow with integrating technologies. But I don't think that is fair, because the kind of changes that need to be done have to do with the history, century of years of organizing learning and teaching in a specific way. So
it's a cultural change fundamentally.
It is
in the teaching environment.
It is. It's
Uno.
Yeah, well, again, to link to what Claire said and also Teresa, is that what I work with is exploring things, letting my learners to understand things, and by they exploring, testing and do things, using visualization, simulation, and so on. So for example, not reading a textbook. If the client in the social care unit, blah, 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 says this, then act like that. But okay, if I try this, if I say this, or if I do this, what will happen? So my learners, they are totally free to do a lot of mistakes. And that's why I think this is good with the simulated environment, where you can test things in a safe way. So they are learning by doing, by exploring, and that also leads to engagement and motivation. And that's what I think is very, very important, because reading a textbook or reading a whatever thing is often, at least, seen by young people a little bit boring. But if you try things, to test things and so on, that is most of the time a little bit more engaging, I think.
I'm incredibly threatened by all this, but I'm realizing I'm a literature major from a very traditional environment. So it is very exciting. Johan.
Yeah, I mean, what we are talking about here, creating motivation, I think is a key factor for reaching good education, and to be able to explore and also to make things wrong is very important, and learn from your mistakes. This is very much how a scientist work also, so it's nothing strange with that. But in school, it's very bad to make wrong. This is a cultural thing, I think. But on the internet, I can see this is a real change. That it's okay to do wrong and also discuss that and also put very open questions. And I think today people who wouldn't be able to raise their hand in a classroom situation can just put a comment on a web page or whatever. It's very simple and basic to just write your thought, even if it's stupid, as a comment on a web page. Like if I'm writing something here on the university wall, you write it on the wall for the university if you want to ask something.
So many universities are centuries old, literally, and rely very heavily on tradition. And I was educated at a university that is literally 1,000 years old, and it was great. But one thing that you inevitably notice there is that institutions, to survive for a long time, they must be resistant to change. And there are many valuable things that comes with being resistant to change, but I sometimes felt, even though I was a very happy student, that maybe this is counterproductive to the agenda, to the educational agenda, somehow. Let's imagine that we get to design a university from scratch, just between the four of you. I don't expect you all to agree, but I'm curious. If you would start higher education and just making it any way you want, how would you begin? Let's start over here with Johan.
Well, everything should be made as simple as possible, I think, but not simpler. Albert Einstein said that once. So this is something that could be done differently today. Today it's very complicated. So actually, if you can make it much more simpler, and in that way create motivation and such things. And also, I think, in the old buildings for the university, you can see how they are organized. So the buildings are a manifestation for how things are organized. And so my university would be able to have it in my pocket, for example. This is one manifestation for the university.
But I'm not quite sure what you mean by simpler. What would be simpler?
Well, for example, as an individual, as a human being, you can actually, through the internet, structure things from a point of view that you believe that yourself is the center of the universe. It sounds complicated, but it's quite simple idea. Also, simpler in a way that everything is very transparent. If you want to learn something, it should also be accessible. How will I be assessed? How will it be measured if I learn something or not? Okay, today, it's a big secret. At the end of the course, perhaps you understand how it was measured, but in many cases, you don't understand even after the course how you were assessed.
I see. Teresa, what would you add or change?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking how I would approach the students then, and I think that it will be very nice that universities see the students as creatives, as creative, as producers, as people who are participated in many different arenas. People who they want to know about something, but they also want to become someone. So I think that I will try to address these aspects of trying to look then, as Claire mentioned before, the human being. So it's not only about knowing something, it's also about doing something or becoming someone. So,
what about Uno?
Well, the future university, I would take away the lecture halls and that stuff, and have more open ideas about discussions like this, for example. Telling the students from day one, this is your problem. Tell me when you solve that, then you're done. Then you've graduated. I've been working with medical education during many years. So my dream is to give the students from the first day, here are a bunch of patients. Take care of them. Tell me when you're done, and I can help you. and can help you. But
I did maybe look a little scared there.
some of those could be virtual, so you can start to do that to begin with. But again, working with real life problems, and then the teachers, your supervisors, older students, senior students, help them and discuss with them and try to find both the knowledge and the skills to solve it. That's more or less my dream.
But surely, just as I do have to kind of learn the letters to be able to look things up on my own, surely in medical training there is some kind of base amount of knowledge that needs to be transmitted in some kind of traditional way first.
But you don't need to have a guy standing here, blah, 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 blah. You can do that on the web page or using your tablet or whatever devices that will be in the future. But so the teacher should not standing here and just repeating things that have been printed. The teacher should be here, discuss with the students instead.
Very well. Claire, at your hypothetical university, would I be allowed books?
Oh, yes, of course. But what I would change is I would do away with diplomas as they are today. And students would only get into universities if they have a personal project for development and liberation. How they will develop and liberate themselves in order to become socially conscious human beings. And once they have this project, then you would have assigned a mentor to work with in order to find out what does he need from the university to develop this project. And the project would be a life project, sort of developing a person. I think, and a socially conscious person, therefore group work would come in and all that, but the diploma would be the curriculum vitae, where you would have all that this person has accomplished during the 2, 3, 4, 5 years that he's been at the university. Not only in terms of what he's learned, or the subjects he's tackled, but what has he accomplished in terms of producing knowledge or producing changes in society.
That's very beautiful. We're going to let the audience in, and it's still questions. Maybe you will feel a need to tell us about your education system. Let's not do that now. Let's ask questions of the speakers since we have them. Who has a question on their mind? Yes, let's start over there. Yes, yep. And can I have your name first, please?
Hi, my name is Bernard. I'm a student here at TSV, Stockholm University. And I have a question. When we have all this creativity in the future, how is the future of grading?
Yes, very interesting. Thank you for your question. What is the future of grading?
The future grading, that's a very good question. The future grading is that I give you a number of problems, and depending on how you are solving those problems, the grades will be based on that, not written traditional exams.
Mm-hmm. Do you all agree?
I can add something here also. I mean, today, when we grade people, we are very... We think we are very safe looking at the ID card and checking that it's the right person and give them a paper and some problems perhaps. But in the future, I think, computers are very good in taking care of many kinds of data at the same time. So we can look at different types of information pointing into the same target, so to say. If it's learning goal, so we can very easily give a transparent map on who is this person? Is it a real person or is it some fake person? We can see if many things point into that phenomenon we call UNO or whatever, and we can also see different kinds of indication on if he or she have learned something. So this open up a lot of, some simple examination process and some more advanced grading process. But if we are transparent, we can say that
first you have to pass the Turing test, and then
yeah, exactly,
and then you get to do some actual exams.
Yeah,
and produce some work.
We can also say that this was a very simple. I asked him a few questions and I put an A on him, but I don't know anything more. This could be one grading. Another type of grading could be for 1 year. The person have worked on projects and a lot of things, and we can be transparent and say what we know exactly. Like when Google are ranking pages, they look actually backwards and see how many other pages are referring to that. This page should be ranked. So we can see if other students are referring to that student, for example, and think he's good, then perhaps he has a very high grade in the other
or
people's mind.
they're just super popular.
Yeah, exactly. It can be that also. But today, if you're popular for a teacher, you get a high grade, perhaps.
Well, yeah, that's true, actually.
So
Yeah.
that you
Interesting.
always have this problem.
I am completely, all my understanding about learning is undermined by this conversation. Yes, we have another question here.
Yeah.
Yes, hello. My name is Lou DeFonte. I go to Stockholm University, master's student. And my question for you is, the American theorist John Dewey talks about learning by doing, experiential learning. Do you feel as though the learning in the future will involve learning by doing, the experience versus the lecture-driven education that we've been seeing over the past few hundred years?
Thank you for your question. Will there be, now having heard you, I almost want to ask, will there be any other kind of learning than learning by doing? Who would like to go first?
I can start with that. And as you had maybe heard from me, yes, learning by doing, absolutely the majority of things will be that. And also grading by doing. Giving you a number of virtual cases. If you are going to be a lawyer, you get a number of virtual law clients to solve their problems. And depending on how you do that, not only if you have the correct thing in the end, but how you do that, checking the process, that would be the part of the grading. So yes, learning by doing and assessment by doing.
Okay, interesting. And does anybody want to add? Yes, Johan?
I think the lectures in the future will be very much about setting a context together. I mean, sometimes it's easier to just meet. So we can have lecture, but with another role, I think. And but it's based then on that people actually have been trying out things before, because otherwise, when you meet, it's kind of confusing conversation. So there's always a first step you do yourself, and then you meet. I think this is some kind of principle. But very much learning by doing. And I mean, looking at YouTube is a classical example today. My son is learning how to play like Jimi Hendrix on his guitar by just looking at YouTube.
There is something connected to this, of course, which has to do with this idea of lifelong learning as an inevitable necessity in the kind of changing society that we're living in. And I think the kinds of educations that you are suggesting do kind of point at preparing the student for taking care of themselves, sort of, so to speak, further on, or being able to return in a more flexible manner further on in life. Do any of you have any reflections on this idea of learning forever?
I think the society today is so complex, so you need to learn constantly. You can't go out med school or teacher training school or law school and say, okay, now I know everything for life. I myself, actually, I'm a dentist by training, which is very odd.
It's a little surprising.
Since I'm a professor in computer science, yes. But I would be a nightmare. It would be dangerous to be a dentist practicing now, because I haven't trained for 30 years. So that's okay, so lifelong learning must be there.
Yeah. Did we have a question from this? Yes, from the back, please. Yeah.
Hello, I study at KTH, and I have a question about boredom, because I believe that learning to handle boredom is actually a skill. And I also believe that it must be taught in both higher education and throughout life and lower education. And in an education system where everything is interactive, is there any place to learn how to handle boredom?
This is a wonderfully wise question. Who would like to begin? Johan.
I think, first of all, everything will not be digital, so to say, and automatic. It will be more visible, this kind of important stuff you're talking about, boredom, handling yourself, being a good decision maker for yourself and others, and learn how to handle leadership and such things. Still, we don't have the culture set up, I think, how to make use in a good way of all technology. But But life is very hard, and boredom is one part of that. And of course, I think by sharing with others, this is the key thing. Through internet, you can meet other minds and share your feelings. And
when I was raising teenagers, sometimes they ask, what is the meaning in my life of learning this subject? And I couldn't give them a good answer. So I said, the meaning is, you're being prepared for the work market. Sometimes you have to show up on time and perform tasks that are meaningless to you. And that's life. And then they said, okay. And then they went away to practice that. You are all talking about a wonderfully meaningful education. But isn't it a little bit a pipe dream to think that the students would then go out and have actually meaningful jobs? I think we should take this boredom question really seriously. We should maybe education should prepare us for not always having meaningful tasks to do. Or am I wrong here? Teresa?
I think that's a great question, because it puts the finger on the, which image or model of society we have in the world of education, for which kind of world we are preparing our students. And I think that one of the problems is that probably we think a lot about the future in a very, sometimes if we look at the curriculum, in a very positive way, and instead of looking at the dilemmas that plenty of dilemmas that we have today in society. So I guess that the challenge is to try to focus on what is going on and trying to look at the realities of the social, political, energetic, economic problems, and try to see what they can do with these problems today, because they're not going to disappear in the future.
Yeah, but Claire?
I don't think the question is good myself, because I think it means, if you want to train people with boredom, means that you're training them to accept society as it is. And I think there are a lot of things to change in society. And personally, I would train people to expect that they are capable of changing society.
So training people for boredom is also training people for obedience and suffering.
Yeah.
That is also, yes, we have a follow-up here. Yeah.
And also it's sort of connected. To teach someone to be constantly creative and productive, isn't that like a straight road to being burnt out? Isn't that unhealthy in some ways?
Yeah. Thank you so much. Claire? Claire, did you have a response to this?
Yeah. Developing yourself is not necessarily being very, very active all the time. It's taking time to integrate your life and to attend to the goals of your life, to see what you want to become, and to progressively liberate yourself from the very cozy, perhaps, world that you were raised in order to take over your role in the world. And there are many different ways of doing this, and many different periods and types of activities to do this. But basically, the problem is always the basic aim of people. I think kids today, when you look at what drives them today, what kind of ideals or success stories do they have in mind? And you know as well as I do that the media imposes these success stories. And in these stories, like be it people from TV, from the sports or whatever, there's very little room for knowledge. It's not people that deal with knowledge that represent the success stories today. And that's why the problem is the kids have to be confronted with types of ideals that will allow them to know how to develop themselves and liberate themselves.
Thank you. We've run out of time, and there's so much to say. Certainly, we've learned that learning by doing is going to be the future, and that we're going to need room for reflection, and that we're teaching students for a life of change. It's fantastic. I really would love to continue, but we really do not have any more time. Thank you to all of my guests, Claire Belísle, Tessy Cerratto Pargman, Uno Fors, and Johan Thorbiörnson. Crosstalks will be back next month with more great minds and intelligent discussions. Be sure to check in at crosstalks.tv for updates on topics and guests. Until then, be safe. and be brave.